I mean, certainly more
Yes, we
around
have, haven't we?
at the time. I think fair to say you're not a conspiracy theorist. You just don't feel the investigation has been done thoroughly. Would that be fair enough?
Yeah, and when that happens, you'll get a range of theories coming in, from people more or less plausible. And, some of them could rightfully be called conspiracy theories. I would prefer to be called somebody who's just asking questions.
So
Um,
what is predominantly wrong then? What is it? I mean, as most people would understand it, if you went around the street with a clipboard and said what happened on 9/11, they would say some terrorists flew planes into the Twin Towers, they hijacked another one went into the Pentagon, one landed in a field. End of story.
yeah, well, I wouldn't dispute most of that. The question is, how did the terrorists get into the planes? How did they fly the planes? These guys were not, several of them were not experienced pilots at all. They've been classed as dangerous actually by flight schools. So, how did they steer the planes so expertly? It's difficult to hit a building that narrow at very high speed. You could ask exactly why did the buildings collapse? It does look like explosions. You can't really deny that. Now that might be an illusion, but a lot the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth Group, they're saying, well, we'd like an explanation, and not just, oh well, there was a lot of jet fuel, so it's bound to collapse. That's not right. Grenfell Tower didn't collapse, and that was a very hot fire. These buildings don't normally collapse. So, I think it's up to the authorities to explain exactly why they collapsed. I mean, these engineers who are taking action in court, they've commissioned a study by the University of Alaska engineering department. They couldn't really call them conspiracy theorists, and they're saying, well, the third building could not have collapsed as it did. It must have been aided and assisted by some sort of external
But
force.
isn't the problem with that, Ian, that there are groups of other engineers that say, well, look, much like you can put two economists in the room and come up with three different answers,
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
there's lots of engineers out there that say, actually, no, steel can burn in that kind of way. You can have a collapse from the inside, which prompts the whole building to come down. It looks like it sort of seems to replicate a controlled explosion, but actually, if everything falls from within, that's what happens. It comes down in that fashion. And there are
yeah.
engineers out there and scientists who are unequivocal about that.
Oh, yeah, no, there are, of course. And as you say, if you put two economists in a room, you get three answers. But, this is something where we want to carry the public. If we're going to go off invading foreign countries on the basis of this, we need to, I think we owe it not only to the people who might die in the foreign countries, but to our own people, to our own military. We owe it to give a thorough explanation. I mean, if they've got trillions of dollars to run the wars, couldn't they just put aside a few million just to thoroughly look at these questions and
But
answer
isn't
them?
their argument, Ian, that they've had the investigation and we know the answer?
Well, they would say that, but if you actually look at the detail, you find that there haven't really been any answers. The relevant body is called NIST in America, and if you carefully read what they say, they're basically saying, well, we won't consider conspiracy theories. So it's a sort of like a circle. They won't consider so-called conspiracy theories, but then, they reject them on the basis that NIST has rejected them. Do you see what I mean? It's all just it's all a closed circle.
But isn't that like, scientists refusing to debate with climate change deniers, for example? They say, well, why would we do that? The evidence is quite clear. We're not going to waste our time debating with people who've got wacky theories. We know what happened. Why would we even entertain the idea that this was an inside job and somebody was planting explosives in there?
Yeah, well, we don't know. We know what it looked like, but we don't really know what happened. And yes, an individual scientist can say, well, I don't want to, but it's up to the government. As I said, if they want to embark on a load of foreign wars, they should at least give us a very thorough explanation, and they should be prepared to stage a debate
So
between the
what do you
scientists.
think happened then, Ian?
What do I think happened? I'm not an expert, Ian. I'm not going to go out and say, well, it was definitely a controlled demolition for two reasons. One is it sounds preposterous. I completely agree. It does sound unlikely. But on the other hand, it does look like there's explosives going off on the top of those buildings. And remember that on the day, all the witnesses, you can find endless witnesses talking about explosions, not about a collapse. They talk about explosions. But hey, Ian, there's other issues here. There's the paper trail as well. There's the impossibility of some of those hijackers. There must have been somebody different flying the planes, at least a couple of the planes. Henshall was regarded as a safety risk on a small plane. You can see the reports. I've got them in my book.
Yeah.
You can see the reports from the air, the people who teach you to fly saying this guy's dangerous. We don't want to take him up again. And that was on a small plane.
Well, somebody might counter that and say, well, evidently he was dangerous. Look what he did.
Well, but how did he manage to? Well, yes, but I don't think they meant dangerous in that way. I think they meant
no. I understand that, but I mean,
skills.
the fact that he wasn't a top-notch pilot, is that really relevant?
Well, it is, because he allegedly took a passenger plane, found his way to the Pentagon, and that's not that easy. Overriding the auto ride, came down in a military type descent, and came down at ground level at well over the permitted speed for those planes. I mean, I don't think anybody would deny that you need good piloting skills to do that.
So to be mad in a plane, curiously, does require quite a lot of pilot-based diligence, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, it's difficult. I don't think it's that easy to fly one of these big planes. And we know that the instructors, so that's another issue. And then, of course, you've got the convenience issue. I mean, this was very convenient. I mean, I'm sorry to be so cynical here, but we went into Iraq on the basis of lies, what turned out to be, let's say, falsehoods, so it wouldn't be the first time that, we'd done things on the basis of falsehoods. And it was so convenient. Bush was facing a really bad autumn that year. He was accused of stealing the elections. And, the evidence would have come out that he did lose Florida. But when it came out, of course, 9/11 had happened and nobody was interested any longer. The military, the CIA got an $18 billion increase in its budget.
You really think the president would have had a couple of planes flown into the Twin Towers in order to get a better result from the Florida damaged Chads debate?
Well, I think
that's a big old leap, Ian, isn't it? That's a massive old leap. I mean, I understand, you write about this, but that's a lot to ask.
It is a lot to ask. But, we did go into Iraq. Remember that they'd already said before 9/11, we want to find a way of going into Iraq. And then and everybody would have said they can't do it, But then 9/11 happened. And then, the pundits all agreed that it was only because of 9/11 they were able to go into Iraq. And we know they wanted to go. So, I'm sorry to suggest this, but I think, I'm not suggesting that they all sat down and planned this in the sort of detail that we're in the sort of slightly overview way that we're looking at it. But I think the CIA were definitely up to something. And we've got Richard Clarke's word for that. And he was, he's the guy who should know beyond anybody, beyond you, me, or anybody. He was the counterterrorism czar in the White House. And he's now saying that there was a black ops CIA operation going on. And they didn't tell him about it. And he was their boss. Basically, if that CIA operation hadn't been going on, then the FBI would probably have stopped the 9/11 attacks successfully. The paper trail is complicated, but I think in the end, rather than the explosions at the towers, which is, as you say, we're not experts, but we can all read government reports. And if you look at when I say the paper trail, I'm not talking about sort of speculative theories on the internet. I'm talking about official government reports. George Tenet, the head of the CIA, was recommended for a severe reprimand by their internal inquiry. We don't know why. It's still secret, and it didn't happen. But we do know that Tenet told the Washington media that if he was reprimanded in any real way, then he would spill the beans on everything he knew, and he never was reprimanded.
What happens?
So there's a lot of stuff there in the paper
Okay,
trail,
just a final point. We're slightly short on time, Ian. But what happens to all the information you've collated, the questions you have? I mentioned at the beginning of this the family of Jeff Campbell and the like. What happens to their demands and things you would like answers to?
Well, I think we've just got to keep pestering people. And if people say, well, isn't it a long time ago? The answer is, Well, it seems to be still pretty important, but we're hearing nothing but 9/11 on the media at the moment, so it still is relevant.